Welcome to English Through Emotional Stories, where we grow in English not by memorizing, but by feeling the meaning of every word. This is more than grammar, more than pronunciation. This is about the human voice and how it rises through darkness. Today, we walk beside Malala Yousafzai, a young girl born into fear who chose not to whisper, but to speak. She believed in school. She believed in books. And she believed that even a small voice can make a world listen. Her story will take us from quiet valleys to international stages. But it begins, like many stories do, with a simple love, the love of learning. Let's begin. Malala Yousafzai was born on July 12, 1997, in the Swat Valley of Pakistan. Swat was beautiful. Mountains, rivers, green hills. It was a place of poetry, snow, laughter, and long histories. But Malala's world was not simple. She was born into a country where girls were often not allowed to dream, where the idea of a girl wanting to read books or speak her mind was strange, even dangerous. But in her home, there was something different. Her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, was a teacher. He had opened a school, and he had named his daughter after a fierce Afghan warrior, a woman who had led men into battle and died with poetry on her lips. Malala grew up surrounded by chalk, books, pencils, and stories. She loved math. She loved science. She loved school. And more than anything, she believed that education was her right. At first, life was peaceful. Malala walked to school with her friends. She studied hard. She dreamed of becoming a doctor. But as the years passed, something began to change in Swat. Strange men with long beards and guns began appearing on the streets. They were called the Taliban. At first, they gave speeches. Then they made rules. Then they made threats. They said girls should not go to school. They said television was a sin. They said music was evil. One by one, schools for girls were shut down. Books were burned. Teachers were killed. Malala was only 10 years old. And suddenly, her world, once full of curiosity, became a world full of fear. But she did not stop learning. She did not stop reading. And slowly she started writing. In 2009, when she was just 11 years old, Malala began to write a secret blog. The BBC published it under a fake name. Each post was handwritten at night by candlelight, then passed to a reporter, then typed and shared with the world. She wrote about the fear in her town, about the silence in her classroom, about her classmates who had stopped coming to school. Her words were simple but brave, because every word was an act of defiance. She wrote, "I had a terrible dream yesterday, with military helicopters and the Taliban. I was afraid going to school because the Taliban had issued an edict banning all girls from attending schools." People began to notice. But the more her words spread, the more dangerous her life became. By the time Malala was 12, she was no longer just writing in secret. She began speaking publicly, giving interviews, standing on stages. Her voice was small, but steady. Her eyes were young, but wise. She said, "I don't mind if I have to sit on the floor at school. All I want is education. And I am afraid of no one." Cameras filmed her. The government noticed her. And so did the Taliban. Her father received threats. Her name appeared on hit lists. But Malala continued to speak, because she believed that silence was more dangerous than bullets. On October 9th, 2012, Malala was on a school bus with her friends. They had just finished exams. The air was calm. They laughed. They talked about homework. Then the bus stopped. Two men climbed aboard. One asked, "Who is Malala?" And then they shot her. A single bullet passed through her head, through her neck, and into her shoulder. The world stopped. News broke across every country. A 15-year-old girl shot for going to school. She was flown to a hospital in Pakistan, then moved to the United Kingdom, barely alive. She was in a coma. No one knew if she would wake up. But Malala? She was not done speaking. In a hospital bed in Birmingham, England, Malala opened her eyes. She had survived. The bullet had not taken her mind. Her spirit was still there. She couldn't speak at first, but her father looked at her and whispered, "You are my Malala." She blinked. She nodded. She smiled. Doctors operated. She began to walk again. And soon, she began to speak again. But her voice had changed. It was now a global voice. And it was just getting started. Malala was now in England, a different land, a different language, a different sky. She had survived the Taliban's bullet, but she had left behind the only home she had ever known. She couldn't return to Swat. It was too dangerous. The people who had tried to kill her were still free. But even in this new world, her mission had not changed. If anything, it had become clearer. Malala had been shot for going to school, and now she would speak for every child who could not go. She began learning English more fluently. She returned to school. She studied subjects like physics, history, and literature, just like any other teenager. But she was not just any teenager. Journalists wanted interviews. Leaders wanted meetings. People wanted to hear the voice they had once tried to silence. And Malala gave it to them, with grace and with fire. On her 16th birthday, Malala walked into the United Nations headquarters in New York City. She wore a pink shawl that had once belonged to Benazir Bhutto, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, another woman who had stood for democracy and paid the price. Malala stood tall. She looked around the room at the world's most powerful people, and she spoke. One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. She told her story of a valley in Pakistan, of a girl who wanted to learn, of a bullet that could not stop an idea. She said, "They thought the bullet would silence us, but they failed." The world listened. Some cried. Some rose to their feet. From that moment, Malala was no longer just a schoolgirl. She was a global symbol of courage, education, and human rights. Malala knew that speeches could inspire, but she wanted action. So, in 2013, she and her father launched the Malala Fund, an organization dedicated to ensuring 12 years of free, quality education for every girl on Earth. She visited Syrian refugee camps. She traveled to Kenya, Nigeria, Brazil, and India. She met with young girls who were living in poverty in war zones under threat. She listened. She shared their stories. She raised money. She built programs. She lobbied governments. She said, "I tell my story not because it is unique, but because it is the story of many girls." Malala was not interested in becoming famous. She was interested in creating change. And the world was beginning to follow. In 2014, just 2 years after the attack, Malala received the highest global honor. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. She was 17 years old, the youngest person in history to receive it. She stood beside Kailash Satyarthi, an Indian activist who had spent his life rescuing children from slavery. Together, they represented both sides of South Asia. Pakistan and India, Muslim and Hindu, girl and man, united for one cause: children's rights. Malala accepted the prize with humility. She said, "I had two options. One was to remain silent and wait to be killed. The second was to speak up and then be killed. I chose the second." The world applauded. But Malala? She went back to school the next day because she still had exams, because she was still a student, because that's what she had fought for, not glory, but education. Even with the Nobel Prize, world tours, and magazine covers, Malala was still a teenager. She liked books. She liked cricket. She liked making jokes. In 2017, she was accepted into the University of Oxford. She studied philosophy, politics, and economics, a degree known for shaping future leaders. At Oxford, she made new friends. She walked to classes in the rain. She laughed, stressed over assignments, stayed up late to study. She was finally, in some ways, just another student. And that, for her, was the greatest victory. Even while studying, Malala kept traveling, kept advocating, kept listening. She spoke out for the Rohingya refugees in Myanmar, for girls kidnapped by Boko Haram in Nigeria, for Afghan refugees fleeing war, for the forgotten, the silenced, the invisible. She used her voice in places that had never heard it before. She went to Facebook and demanded protections for girls online. She partnered with Apple to expand digital learning tools to girls in remote regions. She stood before parliaments, presidents, and private donors. Everywhere she went, she brought the message: let us pick up our books and our pens. They are our most powerful weapons. She had turned her wand into a window, and through it, millions of young girls began to see new possibilities. In 2021, Malala did something unexpected. She got married. Her wedding was small, quiet, and private. She married Asir Malik, a Pakistani man who shared her values. People were surprised. Some had thought she would remain completely focused on activism. But Malala had always said she wanted a full life, not just a public one. She wanted love. She wanted peace. She wanted joy, not as a reward, but as a right. She said, "I still don't know what's ahead, but I know I believe in hope." Even in private, she remains committed to her mission. And through it all, she still reads, still writes, still dreams. Malala's books have been published in dozens of languages. Her first book, I Am Malala, became a bestseller. It tells the story you now know, but in her own voice. She also released books for children, encouraging young readers to dream. She helped launch documentaries and educational platforms. And she mentors young female activists around the world. Malala is no longer just a survivor. She is a mentor, a leader, a symbol, and still always a student. Malala Yousafzai's life began in a valley most of the world had never heard of. She was one girl among millions. She could have stayed silent, but she chose to speak. And that voice, once tiny, once whispered, now echoes across continents. She stood for education. She stood for girls. She stood for the right to read, to write, to grow. And in doing so, she gave courage to millions. Her life teaches us this, that the pen is mightier than the sword, that education is not a privilege, it's power, and that no one is too small to make the world listen. As you learn English through her story, remember that every word you learn is a step toward understanding, a step toward connection, a step toward courage. And maybe someday your story, your voice, will inspire the world too. If you like to listen and learn English more about stories, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Please like and share with your friends who are trying to improve their English knowledge.